Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my #1 running back draft strategy for the 2024 fantasy football season. Now, as you guys can see to the right side of the screen, it is in fact the hero running back strategy. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the entire concept revolves around the idea of selecting one running back between your first two rounds, maybe someone perhaps like Bijan Robinson, who will be your quote-unquote hero running back. Then subsequently after, you're focusing on other positions, wide receivers, quarterbacks, and tight ends, in order to get positional advantages to then later on, from rounds potentially 6 through 8, dip back into the running back position in order to complete your overall starting team. Now, the beauty of fantasy football revolves around the fact that any strategy can work. There isn't one specific way to build a team in order to find success in fantasy football. But what I like to do personally is go after strategies that I can justify with statistics and data, so that when I execute them, I know that I'm getting the highest potential likelihood of success as I approach my 2024 fantasy football draft. So that's exactly what we're going to do over the course of today's episode. I'm going to go ahead and show you all the statistics that revolve around the hero RB strategy and why we should be implementing them as we approach our 2024 fantasy football draft. Now, before we get into today's content, a couple reminders. For those of you guys who have not yet already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2024 season. I cannot thank you guys enough for all the support. We are on our way to 100,000 subscribers. Can't wait to get there. Thank you very much. Another reminder, for those of you guys who want more content or perhaps statistics and data in order to help you guys out for your upcoming drafts, be sure to get my 2024 fantasy football draft guide by heading on over to Underdog Fantasy. At this current moment in time, if you sign up using code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to be able to claim the first-time deposit offer, but you're going to also get my 2024 fantasy football draft guide, the rankings that coincide with the overall draft guide. Those rankings will also be updated over the course of August. So every time I update them, I will email you an updated list. So regardless of when you're drafting, you're ready. But the emails don't stop there. Over the course of the entire regular season, every single Sunday morning, I will send you rankings, which are by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, include flex, all of the potential following in order to help you capture a 2024 fantasy football championship. So take advantage of the opportunity today. Get your hands on my 2024 fantasy football draft guide by using code Andrew and making just one simple deposit, minimum of $10 via Underdog Fantasy. For those of you who are wondering if you're eligible to take advantage of the opportunity, check out the map to the right side of the screen. But for those of you who have already made a first-time deposit and already made an Underdog account in the past and already done that, you can check out the Patreon, in which you can find all that content and much more. Thank you very much. So with that all covered, let's go ahead and let's talk about the method to the madness, how we determine which running backs are truly capable of being quote-unquote hero backs in 2024. I want to begin by introducing the concept of opportunity leading to success in fantasy football. And for those of you who have been around the channel for quite some time, you have heard me say that countless amounts of times, because it is true. Regardless of what position you are in fantasy football, running back, quarterback, tight end, wide receiver, the greatest prospect of scoring more fantasy points derives from touching the ball more and getting more opportunities. Therefore, we want to go ahead and try to actualize the potential value of opportunities, specifically at the running back position. That consists of running back rushing attempts and, of course, targets. Now, of course, a running back could always throw the ball every now and then, but that's not a consistent volume of opportunity. Therefore, of course, as you guys can see to the right side of the screen, we've gone ahead and actualized the value of a running back rushing attempt based on all running back rushing attempts collected in 2023, 11,704. The volume of fantasy points that were accumulated from those rushing attempts, and of course the fantasy per rushing attempt average over the course of the 2023 season being 0.5847. Then we transition to the idea of targets, 3,172. The volume of fantasy points that were accumulated from those targets, and of course the fantasy point per target overall accumulation, 1.11. Now, I do present these statistics just to give you guys an idea and echo my sentiments that opportunity does lead to success. I don't use these numbers in order to predict future success, because this is the average amongst all running backs that participated and got themselves any sort of opportunity, whether it be rushing attempt or target last season. And not all of them are efficient. So this is the baseline average amongst all running backs in the National Football League last year. So again, just echoing the sentiments that if you give a player opportunity, it is going to lead to success and hopefully someone that can be a quote-unquote hero running back for us in 2024. So now that I've actualized the value of an opportunity, I want to transition into talking about workhorse running backs. For those of you who aren't familiar with what a workhorse running back is, at least in my opinion, it's a running back that is getting themselves 21 plus opportunities per game on average. Now, when we've gone ahead and looked at the history of workhorse backs over the course of the last 5 seasons, from 2019 to 2020, 2023, there have been 33 different workhorse running backs who have earned 21 plus opportunities per game on average over that course of time. Now, I've gone ahead and limited that to players who have at least played 8 games minimum within their given season, but those players average 16.92 fantasy points per game. Of those 33 running backs, 25 of them finished as RB1s within their respective season, which is a 76% success rate. Of those RB1s, of course, they average 17.65 fantasy points per game. Additionally, of those 25 RB1s, 17 of them finished as top 12 flex players within their given season, which again, a top 12 flex player consists of running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, all ranked against one another based on their total points scored. That, of course, 17 out of 25 being a 68% success rate, nearly 70%, which again is great, as they're averaging 18.8 fantasy points per game. Now, if these statistics aren't enough to kind of give you an idea that when you give a running back a high volume of opportunities, it is going to lead to success, I want to talk about players who just across the board may not consistently get 21 plus opportunities every single week, but over the course of a season, in a couple weeks, if they're given those opportunities, are they still finding success? Last season, from weeks 1 through 18 in 2023, when we talk about running backs who were given 21 plus opportunities within a singular game throughout weeks 1 through 18, there was 184 different instances in which that occurred. Those running backs averaged 18.52 fantasy points per game. Of those 184, 123 of them finished as RB1s within that given week, which over the course of the entire season, that is literally 57% of the RB1s going to running backs who had themselves 21 or more opportunities within a given week. Again, opportunity is going to lead to success in fantasy football, but we're specifically looking for these kind of running backs who are workhorses that are getting themselves the most opportunities amongst all within the National Football League. And the primary reason I want to focus on this is purely because of the scarcity of workhorse running backs. Again, if you go to the early 2000s, maybe mid 2000s, you could find multiple running backs that have themselves 300 plus touches within a given year. I mean, when I talk about multiple, I mean over 70+% increase in comparison to what it is currently within 2023 going into 2024. The numbers are staggering in terms of the volume of lost touches in terms of rushing attempts that we have seen in the National Football League. Of course, not by accident, because the game has gone to the air, as we have so many quarterbacks breaking records every single year in terms of overall passing attempts, yardage, etc. But nonetheless, the scarcity of the running back position, and specifically good workhorse backs, revolves around the players that you can see on screen. The 4 primary workhorse, quote-unquote, hero running backs that you should be investing in: Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, and of course, Jonathan Taylor. All of them who I anticipate and project to get between 20 to 23 overall opportunities per game going into this upcoming season. And then we have the second tier of overall players. Many of these players in which you saw within my overall running back tier list rankings video, in which I produced and put out just a couple days ago. These running backs consisting of guys like Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley, Kyren Williams, Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, Isaiah Pacheco, Rachaad White, James Cook, and Travis Etienne. And like I mentioned in that video a couple of days ago, all of these running backs have demonstrated that they have the ability and are given the opportunity by their coaching staffs and their teams to be workhorse running backs. You talk about Kyren Williams. Last season in the 12 games he played, averaged 23.0 opportunities per game. Alvin Kamara, from weeks 4 through 16, after coming back from the suspension and prior to his injury, of course, he didn't play the final game of the season, but he was averaging 21.17 opportunities per game. We talk about James Cook. As soon as the offensive coordinator change happened, and of course Joe Brady took over, James Cook was averaging 20.9 opportunities per game. Rachaad White, as soon as they got to week 7 through 20, all the way into the NFL playoffs, averaging 20.7 opportunities per game. Again, all of these running backs that are on screen are very much so capable of handling a workhorse level of opportunity. And the reason why that matters is because of the statistics at the very top of the screen. When I've gone ahead and accumulated all running back statistics from 2019 to 2023, I found that there were 260 total running backs who, within their given season, had a base average of 9 or more opportunities per game over the course of that season. And when you go ahead and break it down between 9 through 11 potential overall opportunities, those players averaged 9.58 touches per game, which eventually led to 7.29 fantasy points per game on average throughout a 17-game span. We find the following. Again, when we're talking about the sweet spot, we're looking for players that are getting, again, 21 plus opportunities per game. If you can get into that plus conversation like we have seen in the past, of course, you're going to find a boatload of success. But the pure guys that we want in this conversation are players that are going to get themselves 20 plus opportunities a game, or are on that borderline and potentially can get themselves into that conversation by the end of the 2024 season. Like I said before, opportunity leads to success in fantasy football. And in the current meta of fantasy football, a lack of opportunity will not suffice. When you just look at the history of just the last decade of fantasy football, 2014 to 2023, there's only been one running back over the course of the last decade that has been able to accomplish an RB1 season with less than 200 overall opportunities. There's only been 22 running backs that have been able to accomplish an RB2 season with less than 200 opportunities. Again, these are very rare feats to find with a lack of opportunity, which of course, we're looking in the direction of the running backs on screen in order to be that potential hero for us in 2024. Now, as we enter the first round of our fantasy football drafts, and we make our potential first round selection, if it is one of these running backs like a Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor, etc., we're looking for players that immediately and without a doubt are going to be top 12 flex players and ranked within that top 12 flex by the end of the season. Because when you make a first round investment, you better be getting a top 12 player in terms of their overall production. And when we look at the overall distribution of positional overall success from 2021 to 2023, we have found that there's a pretty even distribution of running backs to wide receivers that have accomplished top 12 success in the flex overall ranking. 47% in both those overall positions, and of course the tight end position still in the conversation when you have guys like Travis Kelce and of course Mark Andrews having great years in 2022 and 2021. But when you go ahead and look at the entire industry, ESPN, Yahoo Fantasy, Sleeper, Underdog Fantasy, of course, be sure to use code Andrew. Thank you very much. When you look at the entire landscape, very seldom will you ever see a split down the middle of 6 running backs and 6 wide receivers selected within the first round of a given draft, as it really does sit at either a 5 to 7 split or even harsher, a 4 to 8 split in the advantage of wide receivers every single time. So the question is, why does that division even exist? Even though year over year we have seen and we have proven that running backs are always in that top 12 conversation. Even if you expand, instead of going from 2021 to 2023 on screen, if I was to include 2019 to 2023, in terms of the flex overall distribution, there have been 31 running backs, 26 wide receivers, and 3 tight ends. That's a 52% success rate for running backs if you just go ahead and accumulate the last 5 seasons. It's not as equal as it has been in the last 3 seasons, but again, it should be a more even split, even though it is not. So the question is, why are people afraid of running backs? Why are they hesitant to invest when you can invest in a hero that can carry your team to the promised land, capturing a 2024 fantasy football championship? And as I asked myself this question, it's quite easy. People are afraid of the age of running backs, injuries that they may sustain, and of course, return rates from being an RB1 in one season and returning as an RB1 in the following season, because those numbers haven't looked great in seasons past. So let's go ahead and let's talk about them one at a time. Let's talk about running back age in specific. When we look at the last 5 seasons of fantasy football in a half PPR scoring format, these are the 60 running backs that were able to accomplish a top 12 running back standing. Of these 60 overall running backs, we find the age distribution heavily is in favor of running backs between the age of 22 to 26. And I mean, honestly, 24 to 26 looks pretty good as well. But 22 to 26 consists of nearly 77% of the RB1 overall performances that we have seen over the course of the last 5 seasons. These players typically, on average, in year 4.08 to be exact, and on average at an age of nearly 25 years old, that being the peak prime of a running back. So as we approach our upcoming drafts, we're looking for players to potentially be within this age, but there's always going to be players that are, outliers. Raheem Mostert's, Derrick Henry's that are finding success even at an older age, or guys that come immediately into the league and are able to put up top 12 standings. Even though that was common in the past, it hasn't been as much recently. Now, when we go ahead and continue, besides just age, there's also the conversation to have regarding experience in terms of years played within the National Football League. Many may look at it as quote-unquote experience. That's how I look at it. Others may look at it as wear and tear on the body. How many seasons and how many touches have you accumulated, and is that going to impact your potential for success? When we look at the overall experience range, 2 to 6 years is prime. That's literally 78.33% of the RB1 overall exposure over the course of the last 5 seasons of fantasy football. While, of course, there are some outliers, those are the ones that we are looking for at a vast majority. So, of course, there is going to be a conversation of does the age of a player, does the overall experience of the player lead them to potentially getting more injured over time because of all those touches, because of the higher age, and potentially being injury prone, which of course we transitioned to this conversation. When I took the top 32 ranked running backs based on ADP of the 2023 season that were selected top 32, when I took all those running backs, and the reason why I wanted to expand to 32 is because if I just held it to the first 24 ADP at the running back position, again, there just wasn't enough volume at all those overall positions to get a pure understanding of the average games missed and the injuries that were sustained by those different age groups. But anyway, we expanded it to 32. In this circumstance, we had 6 players between the ages of 21 to 23 last season, 17 between 24 and 26, and 9 between 27 and 29 plus. There weren't any 30-year-olds drafted within the first 32 running backs. Of course, Raheem Mostert far later within the overall conversation. But nonetheless, when you take on the overall games played, games missed due to injury, the numbers honestly are quite similar between the ages of 24 to 26 versus 27 to 29. And like we just mentioned just moments ago, the peak overall age of where we want a running back that finds the most distribution of success as an RB1 is between 24 and 26. There's a lot of consistency there, yet there is a lot of running backs that still, regardless of that fact, find themselves getting injured, similar to running backs that are 27 to 29. And even though you may look at a running back in that sense, like a Saquon Barkley, like a Christian McCaffrey, like a Derrick Henry going into this upcoming season, who are all either 27 or older. Of course, if I'm not mistaken, Derrick Henry's going into his age 30 season, Christian McCaffrey going into his age 28, and of course Saquon Barkley 27. When you look at this overall distribution, there's a 2.4% difference in terms of average games missed between these two overall age groups. I don't see it as something that we need to be worried about. And especially when we have elite running backs as such that you can see on screen that are going to be in the older group, we all know and we all believe that they're going to be top 12 running backs at the given position. And I, without a doubt in my mind, believe that they're going to find success in 2024. The only reason I bring up this conversation is because, again, there aren't very many older running backs. There isn't much data on them because the NFL stands for not for long. The average career in the National Football League is not long. So when we do have opportunities to find running backs that are older and that are still finding themselves a lot of success within the league, obviously we want to pay attention because in comparison to the rest of the pack, there isn't that vast of a difference in terms of potential injury rates that we have seen over the course of careers. So with this all taken into account, I now want to transition into talking about, besides running backs, taking on Father Time and the ticking time bomb of their knees falling apart, they have to also compete against wide receivers because that is our primary decision when we go into the early rounds, first and second rounds of our drafts. Do we want to take a running back or do we want to take a wide receiver and potentially invest in someone who could score just as many points? Or we can go ahead and lean with this quote unquote RB hero approach and continue on forward. So let's go ahead and let's transition forward. And I want to go ahead and present, the games missed of top 24 ADP running backs and wide receivers over the course of the last 2 seasons. So total players of the running back position consisted of 14, while of course wide receivers consisted of 23 selected within the top 24 ADP over the course of the last 2 seasons. In terms of health percentage, based on total eligible games to play, and of course the games that they actually played, the running back position played 86.55% of their games, while we had the wide receiver position within this construct playing 89% of their overall games, 89.7 to be exact. But if we take that upon a 17-game span of a season, that leads to running backs playing 14.71 games, and of course wide receivers playing 15.26 games, which again, the main difference is a half a game, which really isn't much when we talk about top 24 ADPs in comparison between running backs and wide receivers. And again, the distribution between these two, 14 one way, 23 the other, I understand that there is, 30% more wide receivers within this overall conversation, but the difference is not vast enough for me to be afraid of selecting a running back to be the hero and carry my team. The potential of an injury does not lead me away from selecting a player like a, Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, Bijan Robinson going into this upcoming season. And when we go ahead and continue on, besides injuries, besides age, another fear that many may have is return rates at the wide receiver and running back positions. When we talk about the last 5 seasons of fantasy football and the top 12 players within given positions, to give you an example, if a player finishes an RB1 in 2022 and then subsequently the next year also finished as an RB1, he would have been counted within the number 23 there. So if in fact we go ahead and talk about the last 5 seasons and the return rates of players, RB1s either once again being RB1s or diminishing to an RB2, or potentially, RB2s that elevate to an RB1, or players, regardless of these two positions, elevating themselves into the top 12 conversation for the first time in their careers, regardless of when it was. Again, we have the following statistics. If we go ahead and look at the per season average in terms of RB1s returning to RB1s, that's a 4.6 RB1 average in terms of return rates. Again, if we uptick that to 5 is not a great number. Only 5 running backs returning to the top 12 every year on average since 2019, year over year, is not a great number. And that's pretty much exactly where the wide receiver position is at. In fact, when you look at both these overall return rates across the board, these numbers are very similar. And it doesn't give the wide receiver position that much of a great advantage. So even though the idea of age, injuries, return rates, being potential fears for us in terms of why we might not want to invest in a running back, quite frankly, we should. So taking this information into account alongside of injuries, age, of course, now return rates at the running back and wide receiver position, I'm not afraid of investing at the running back position. And before I continue, I want to make it very clear. Yes, an early running back selection could very easily turn into an injury. Nick Chubb demonstrated that last season. It exists. But this fear that many people have and attribute to the running back position statistically cannot be justified. Based on the data that we've talked about today, whether it is age, whether it is, overall injuries in comparison to the wide receiver position, whether it is overall return rates, it can't be justified. These numbers are far too close between these two positions. And yes, they are close within the early rounds, but as you get into the later rounds, they're going to begin to divert. And that's why we want to go ahead and select an early running back within our 2024 leagues and get a hero that absolutely is going to be a workhorse, not only because of the scarcity at the position, because again, there aren't very many workhorse backs in the entire landscape of fantasy football. So once you go ahead and invest in that early running back within your first 2 rounds, hopefully within that first round, grabbing one of the top 4 workhorse backs, you can proceed into rounds 3 through 8 that I'm going to now transition to now in order to show you guys where the running back and wide receiver position begin to divert and why making that early investment in a running back really is going to help you out for the remainder of the season while you're giving yourself positional advantages with wide receivers, tight ends, and of course, quarterbacks. So let's do just that. And let's talk about rounds 3 through 8, picks 25 through 96 in terms of overall ADP in the history of fantasy football that justifies the idea of executing a hero RB draft strategy. So again, when we look at the overall ADP of picks in 25 through 96, specifically if you look at 2023, of the 25 running backs that were selected between picks 25 and 96, 13 of them were able to return the value and bring value back on their overall investment by either outproducing or having an identical overall match to their flex ADP ranking in 2023. Now, of those 25 running backs, besides those 13, 8 of them fell short due to injury, and 1 of them was within 5 overall ADP of where they were selected, which again, great. So that makes it 22 out of those 25 running backs as perceivably proper selections within the given season, because you don't predict that injuries are going to occur, right? Nick Chubb blowing out his knee early is not predictable. Joe Burrow on a random Thursday night, tweaking his wrist and being out for the rest of the season are not things that you can predict ahead of time. Therefore, 88% success rate isn't bad at the running back position there. So then we continue on with this overall conversation, but instead of focusing on flex ranking within these running backs in 2023, if we just talk about within their own positional ranking, 10 of those 25 were able to return value on their overall investment. 8, of course, fell short due to injury, and 4 of those running backs within at least 5 overall ranks from where they were drafted. Again, 22 out of 25, an 88 overall percent success rate in terms of proper selections from what we could have perceived in 2023. Now, if you go ahead and transition this conversation and compare this to the wide receiver distribution, it's pretty alarming. In 2023, we saw that of the 32 wide receivers selected between picks 25 through 96, rounds 3 through 8, 13 of them were able to return value in terms of a flex ranking. Additionally, 6 of them fell short of their overall ranking because of an injury, and 0 of them were within 5 overall rankings, which is 19 out of 32 and 59% success rate in terms of proper selections. If you go ahead and just talk about positional ranking, it is far better. But when we focus on the overall flex ADP, drafting running back against wide receiver and their overall value in terms of the concept of getting a return on your investment, when we talk about this overall distribution of 59%, this just goes to show that wide receivers are being selected far too early, and it is evidently pushing down valuable running backs within the overall draft boards. So when you take an early running back in a hero approach, okay, and there are so many wide receivers in comparison to running backs being selected through rounds 3 through 8, you have an opportunity to select that early running back in round 1. Subsequently follow it with wide receivers in rounds 2, rounds 3, potentially even round 4 in order to get your 3 starting wide receivers, or if you're in your league in which you have 2 starting wide receivers and then your subsequent flex. So not only are you able to address your hero running back, you're able to get 3 other starters who are top tier wide receivers at that are being selected between rounds 2 through 4. And you're able to avoid the disaster at the wide receiver position because of how many wide receivers are drafted so early. The value of them diminishes extremely quickly in comparison to running backs who are being pushed down the board. And I'll give you examples as we continue on throughout this video in terms of going into 2024 fantasy football drafts. If you wait until rounds 6 through 8 to reinvest in running back, boy, is there a lot of incredible value back there that, quite frankly, a lot of people are ignoring because they are prioritizing running backs early. And of course, having to select wide receivers later on in their draft in order to go ahead and recoup value because they want to still have a strong starting roster. Now, like I mentioned earlier, from rounds 3 through 8, when we go ahead and talk about injuries between running backs and wide receivers, they begin to divert even harder than they did earlier on. Again, moments ago when we talked about the top 24 ADP and the injuries of running backs and wide receivers over the course of the last 2 seasons, really there wasn't much of a percent difference. Overall, it was a half a game difference. But when you look at the last 2 seasons and between these rounds, the 57 running backs that were taken and the 81 wide receivers that were taken, there's a full game difference plus in advantage of the wide receiver position. And just to put this into perspective, that's with 42% more wide receivers who have an opportunity to get injured, yet they are far healthier within this overall conversation. So when you go ahead and approach your draft by taking an early running back in that first round and following with 3 subsequent wide receivers, you're giving yourself an advantage because you're not forcing a running back onto your roster that could fall within this range of missing, 20% of their overall games within 2024. Now, besides the potential risk and the injuries and the downside of all of this, there's still positives between rounds 3 through 8. In 2023, there were 5 league winners on both positions. Guys like Breece Hall, James Cook, David Montgomery, Alvin Kamara, Rachaad White, all league winners last season based on the value at which they were selected and their overall end of season ranking. At the wide receiver position, it existed as well. Deebo Samuel, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Brandon Ayuk, and Mike Evans, all finding themselves a boatload of success within the given year. All, of course, wide receiver ones by the end of the season, despite the fact that they were selected throughout this span of time, which many people, see as potentially dangerous. I see it as an investment that you can make in order to go ahead and get wide receivers that are first and foremost not going to get injured as often, and of course can deliver and potentially be league winning wide receivers between rounds 2 through 4 within your overall investment. Okay, let's go ahead and let's close out today's video by giving you guys one more overview in terms of the overall thought process that I have going into my 2024 fantasy football drafts and why all the statistics that I demonstrated really do justify the approach of going with the RB hero within our 2024 fantasy football leagues. Again, like we mentioned earlier, the low RB1 return rates in comparison to wide receiver 1 return rates, again, they're both equal, but again, they're also both very concerning. Again, the fact that there's very little consistency at both positions is highly concerning. So if you're able to grab an RB1 early that like Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor, that are going to be in the top 12 running back conversation, top 12 flex conversation, it's an investment that really you should have the utmost confidence in making. Not only that, like I mentioned before, the scarcity of workhorse running backs is continuing to be a concern year over year for fantasy football. So in this circumstance, if you're able to get one, more power to you. Like we already covered, as the rounds go on, the potential injury risk for running backs continues to get higher. In comparison from rounds 1 through 2 to rounds 3 through 8, those running backs, they really start to divert and start to miss a handful of games, 20% in fact, based on just last season's overall averages. So when you're able to go ahead and make investments between rounds 3 through 8 that don't include the running back position, but in fact include the possibility of getting a quarterback, first and foremost, who is an elite one, a player who is ranked within the top 5 of their position. I talked about it in yesterday's quarterback rankings video. The quarterback position in the last 2 seasons has never been more injured in the National Football League. 2022, a league-high 68 starting quarterbacks within the given year. 2023, 66, the second highest in NFL history. If you're able to get a quarterback that is elite within rounds, 1 through 6, that is going to be able to not miss any time and is still going to deliver a top 5 performance, of course, you're giving yourself a massive positional advantage. And you guys know that I always want to go ahead and early invest within a tight end and get someone who is elite, because if I don't make that overall move, then I'm just going to wait, because the rest of the pack begins to really blend and all score similar volumes of points. So when I'm giving myself positional advantages in both those overall conversations, I already have a stud RB1 to begin, and then I'm taking 3 shots at wide receiver between rounds 2 through 4. I'm truly constructing a complete roster. And when you have an opportunity to go back into the running back conversation in the late round 6 through 8, or potentially even earlier, take this into account. On average, between rounds 3 through 8, 32 to 36 wide receivers are drafted, all while 21 to 25 running backs on average are being drafted between rounds 3 through 8. If in fact both of them are going to create equal opportunity of league-winning players, again, just like in 2023 and in 2022, very similar numbers, if they're both going to have a very equal likelihood, why wouldn't I want to dig into the number of only 21 to 25 running backs in comparison to 32 to 36 wide receivers? There's a far greater likelihood that I'm going to hit when investing in that running back, getting back into the conversation between rounds 6 through 8, players who, like I mentioned earlier, are being undervalued. When I looked at the overall ADPs of 5th round tight ends, we're talking about Trey McBride, who's in that conversation. If on Underdog he falls a little bit, he's a 5th round player. On ESPN, he is at the beginning of the 5th round. If you go to Yahoo, I guarantee you could probably get him in the 6th or 7th. There are some crazy things going on over there. But even if you don't get Trey McBride, you can still get Mark Andrews in the 5th, Dalton Kincaid. These are great players at their current positions that are going to be able to deliver and give you a positional advantage. Not only that, in the 6th round, if you want to invest in a quarterback instead of a running back, you certainly can. CJ Stroud, Kyler Murray, those are the current ADPs of those quarterbacks on Underdog Fantasy as it currently stands. If you just wait another round, you wait to the 7th round, perhaps invest in a running back in round 6. You can get Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, and Jordan Love in round 7 at the quarterback position, which honestly might likely be the best play, because when I looked at running back ADPs between rounds 6 through 7, on Underdog right now, we have David Montgomery, Alvin Kamara, and Ramondre Stevenson. David Montgomery with a 73.3 ADP, Alvin Kamara 74.0, Ramondre Stevenson 81.6. These are players that you absolutely want to snag to go ahead and have as your RB2, who are all absolutely capable of not only being RB2s, but potentially RB1s. Alvin Kamara obviously has demonstrated that over his entire career. Ramondre Stevenson back in 2022 was the number 11 overall back. I mean, David Montgomery last season was a monster, despite where he was being drafted. And right now, it seems like he's once again being disrespected. Either way, besides these running backs, there's still going to be other running backs that you can invest in. Again, rounds 9 through 15 plus, that's a completely different conversation in terms of digging for sleepers that are absolutely available there. Just looking at last season, handcuff running backs that were able to find overall success, whether it was with injury or without. Kyren Williams took over the job, period. There was no injury to Cam Akers that led to Kyren Williams being the guy. Jerome Ford benefited from an injury. Devin Singletary just beat out Dameon Pierce. Ezekiel Elliott benefited from injury. Again, 2 and 2, both scenarios in which you can find waiver wire help and or players late in your draft to invest in that are running backs that could very easily take over the job in positions in which they're not 100% stable. We saw this in 2023, can very easily once again happen in 2024. So when you only invest into a running back, at least early on, in rounds 1 and potentially 6, 7, maybe even 8, depends on whichever one of those presents the value of a running back that you want to invest in, potentially, maybe round 6, Alvin Kamara, round 7, Alvin Kamara, depends on what his ADP looks like in that current circumstance. But then you have the opportunity of then getting depth later on in your draft and then also getting some lottery tickets that could end up hitting. In my opinion, this is the number 1 running back draft strategy in 2024. The final notes I wanted to go ahead and mention before we close out today's video, of course, revolve around the idea that regardless of what strategy you're approaching within your 2024 fantasy football drafts, whether you do plan on implementing this or giving it a shot, understand that regardless of the strategy that is on hand, you always have to react and adapt to what's happening around you. You can't just be 100% tunneled on, all right, I'm selecting a running back round 1, and then I have to draft a wide receiver in round 2 and 3. If I'm doing a, potential strategy in which I selected Christian McCaffrey number 1 overall, hypothetically speaking, and somehow, some way, Jonathan Taylor drops to me in the second round, I have to take that opportunity. I have to take that running back because he has fallen far lower than where he should have. So I'm willing to go ahead and double up on a running back if the value is there. Typically, that's not going to happen. If you play within a league that, of course, has smart players, which I'm sure all of you do, competitive leagues, you're not going to be given those opportunities. But again, don't be afraid to divert because you're reacting and adapting to what is around you. That is purely, in my opinion, the beauty of fantasy football. Like I mentioned earlier, it is the fact that there isn't just one strategy to find success. You can build a team any way you want and still win a fantasy football championship. All right, guys. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Be sure to go out, try the hero running back draft strategy, whether it's drafting via Underdog Fantasy or your own leagues. Let me know how it goes down in the comment section. If you guys have any teams that you drafted, be sure to post it down below. I'll give you guys my thought process and, of course, a rating for your team. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I'll be back tomorrow with another video. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.